Go. All right, perfect. Thanks so much. And really, the overall point that we're trying to make here from the study for the weekend, just how important it is to know that our God is our creator, and what difference does it make knowing that our God is alive, and what difference can it make for young people who are searching for meaning and purpose in their life? What's the personal impact of a God who has fashioned each one of us for his glory? The third verse is what we're going to focus on in this particular session, and I'm not a song leader. That looks small to me. Hopefully you can see that. But this is the third verse. We're not going to sing the chorus, just the third verse, and I've asked Miles to kick it off for us here. Let's sing together this third verse just so it's fresh in our minds about what we're thinking about and talking about. Yours, life from All right. And really, if you think about it, if atheistic scientists had already discovered how to create life from nothing, wouldn't they have revealed it with great fanfare? And the reason we haven't seen it is because it doesn't exist. There's no proof. They haven't been able to recreate, because secure is life from mortal mind. God holds the germ within his hand. Men may search, but they cannot find, for God alone does understand. That's the truth of this particular song. This particular song that we know, written by a brother, A.W. Dickus, I think there was a brief reference to this yesterday, 1966, and wrote it in the year when this was the cover of Time magazine. Is God dead? Powerful question, troubling question, created doubts for some people, and this question persists even in our modern age. And our young people need to know that our God is alive. So how many of you in the audience today have teenagers, or maybe your grandparents of teenagers, aunt and uncles got teens that you're here to help support? All right, hands down. How many of you have tweens? All right. How many of you have both? All right. May God bless you. All right. Now, why do we laugh at that? Why do we say such things? Because parenting tweens and teens is challenging, right? And it creates, though, tremendous opportunities for us to help teach our children during what becomes an age of reason, where they're beginning to get beyond reciting Bible facts necessarily. And so really important for us to make sure that we're on pace with everything that's going on. So we face this question: will our children leave home with a cartoon-like faith that was developed early in their childhood, but that did not grow along with them? So where the spiritual didn't keep pace with the physical. And so, friends, our job, of course, is, and really our privilege, is to make sure that we keep pace, and we help them to keep pace with the development over time that it equals the physical and the spiritual together. All right, so we all love our kids, we love our grandkids, we love our nieces and nephews. And so one of the things that I've learned as a parent, I know you can echo this as well, kids need more than one pass at information. And so we're going to cover similar information of what they're going to get in the back, and just really important for all of us to repeat some of these things in our home. Look for opportunities to cover the material you're hearing today with your kids. They need that. So let's all work hard to reinforce what Jarrett and Jordan and Ricky are covering in the classroom with our kids today. Really important for them. If you're taking notes, and you're going to see this on the board, there are 4 primary things we're going to walk through in this particular section that'll be really important for them and really important for you to think about as you're going to reinforce some of these truths with them. And so the first thing is that you are made in the image of God. That's the primary message that they're going to hear to get started. And so let's look at some scriptures that reinforce this, because the Bible does support all the things we're going to talk about in all of the sessions today. And really the beginning of this, just thinking about how we were, in fact, created. And so Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Fundamental, important, reinforce it. This is to declare God as the creator is certainly counterculture, but this enduring truth is going to outlast our modern civilization and any other civilization that follows us. We're made in his image. Genesis 1:26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So we are created, and our kids need to know this, in his image, in his likeness. We are wonderfully made. Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14 says, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well." And just as the verse of the song says in the chorus, "In him we live." This is from Acts 17. If you were with us last night, you saw this particular passage. It's worth repeating for us. And it says that, "And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring." So this particular section is so important for us to think about how that from God, our kids receive their identity. God assigns our value and their value. And so our kids don't have to wonder where they came from or who they are. They're made by God, and they should have confidence in their Creator. And so this is really the very first important fundamental truth for us to reinforce for them in our conversations and in our Bible readings and so forth with them. The second thing, in addition to God as our Creator and us being created in his image, is that we are unique by God's design. And so think about what would you use as an example in life, as some evidence to try to help convince your kids about design and about the uniqueness of the world that we live in. And we've seen an example even from Gerald earlier today. Could simply just use the solar system, right? We could talk about the sun, the moon, and the stars, the planets, all of these things, just tremendous evidences of design in the world. We could look at our own Earth. We could drill down further, look at things like the Grand Canyon. We could look at the animal kingdom. We could even talk about in the next couple of days here about weather patterns and help them to see all these fascinating things that God put into place. But maybe one of the most significant and easiest is to look at what's right in front of us and what's right in front of them. And what's so top of mind for them very, very often is their body. And so thinking about the human body, we're going to share a few evidences there and also to help them in the classroom. But think about some of the evidences that we could think about. So from the human body perspective, I think Psalm 8 was also read earlier today. That's a verse that we want to think about is Psalm 8, verses 3 and 4. And David said, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him?" And so consider about, I don't know, five or so different aspects of the human body and how you could go deeper in some of these with your own kids to try to make an impression upon them that things are not random chance, but there is design in the universe. There's, in fact, design in our own body. So did you know that during your lifetime, you'll do something 500 million times? You'll blink your eyes. Blinking clears away dust and bacteria collected by an antibacterial fluid that you produce. Use 6 tiny muscles to move your eyes in all directions in perfect coordination. Muscles also allow your retina to adjust for a range of brightness from 10 billion to 1. And your retinas are covered in blood vessels, but your brain just ignores them so that you can still see. And don't forget that each eye has a blind spot, but it's a different spot in each eye, so it doesn't affect your ability and your vision. And as the psalmist says, "The seeing eye, the Lord has made." Have you ever stopped and marveled that you can hear and understand minor changes in air pressure caused by vibration? These vibrations are usually known as sound, and our eardrums can vibrate 20,000 times a second without bursting. And this is because tiny muscles immediately tighten when we hear a loud sound. But if you're straining to hear, those muscles loosen. Ears need to be protected from dirt and germs, so God designed them to produce a sticky wax. There's a purpose for it. It's also antibacterial, fighting infections, and skin cells form a conveyor belt that brings the dirty earwax out of your ear. Ears are a stunning testimony to the brilliance of our Creator. God's design of our bodies is marvelous. So think about your skeletal system. 206 keep your organs in place, anchor your muscles, provide support for walking. Bones are made of two very different substances. There's a hard crystal material mixed with tough collagen. The crystal material makes up 70% of the bone's dry weight, and collagen makes up the rest. Now, if your bones were just the crystal material, they would shatter. And too much collagen, and they'd be too rubbery to actually be useful. But they're the perfect mix of both. Strong, but elastic enough to adapt to the stresses that we put on them. Consider your bones a little more. They aren't just keeping you from being a pile of goo on the floor. You see, deep in your bones, brand new blood cells are being created to replace old, dying ones. In fact, about 20 trillion red blood cells carry oxygen to every cell in your body. It's a tough job, and every second, 2 million of them wear out and die. But your bone marrow produces new ones at the rate of, you guessed it, 2 million per second. Incredible, right? This production is a remarkably well-balanced system. This level of detail reminds us that our bodies didn't get here by chance. They were created. Did you know that the brain never stops working? It's hard at work during the day, of course, but at night we understand that it really ramps up. As you rest, as you rest, your brain gets to work, processing, organizing, storing all of the information that you learned throughout the day. And that's not all. Your brain also gets rid of waste, repairs cells, and moves memories to long-term storage. For children, it produces growth hormones. Yes, 86 billion brain cells are busy communicating with each other to coordinate all of this and more. And you thought you were resting in your sleep, and yet the activity of rest is just another example of God's design. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. One last one. Your lungs are both warm and moist, the ideal spot for bacteria to grow. So why don't we get more lung infections? Well, God designed multiple systems to keep your lungs clear. First, you produce a quart of mucus a day to trap dust and germs before air enters your lungs. Anything that makes it past that gets expelled up to a so-called escalator with tiny waving hairs inside your lungs. And if that fails, special white blood cells are constantly in your lungs on the prowl for the nasty predators, intruders. Without these systems, pneumonia would kill each one of us. But no, our bodies aren't the product of millions of years of chance. And our kids need to know about that. I read a lot of this from Answers in Genesis. Is a good resource that you can tap into to help share with your kids. I think Apologetics Press is another great site that can be useful for you if you're looking for material on some of these types of topics about creation and other things that can be really helpful for us as we try to engage them. But really all of this just helps us to see that design in our universe, in our body, wherever it is, it demands that there is a designer. And so really interesting that Gerald mentioned the framework and the usage throughout Scripture of a house. I wasn't aware that he was going to make reference to that, but this particular verse I think is really helpful for us as we think about that we're unique by God's design. Hebrews 3:4 continues that house theme, if you will. It says, "For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God." And so think about one of the challenges that our kids have and what they're hearing, maybe what they're struggling with on their own. Gender selection was predetermined. And so Mark 10:6 says, "But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female." 1 Corinthians 12:14 through 17, we think about this in terms of as Christians, how do we support one another? How do we function in the church? The church reference that Paul uses here is about the body. And so interesting that this metaphor in 1 Corinthians 12:14 through 17 reads, "For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, 'Because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body,' well, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, 'Because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body,' that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? And so that's important for us to think about from a church perspective, that we need one another, that we're all unique in terms of our ability that God has given us. But our children are unique in the world. In fact, within our own families, for those of you that have multiple children and grandchildren, isn't it so fascinating that can be so different and yet come from the same two parents? They're so unique, and God has made them that way intentionally. He made us male or female. He made us light or dark. He made us tall or short. He gave us varied abilities and personalities and interests. And those things should be celebrated in terms of the uniqueness of our children. In the whole world, there'll never be another person like them. And sometimes that's challenging for them because they want to fit in. They don't want to be different. It's the last thing they want to be. And yet God created them that way for a purpose. And we need to help them to see that it's by design, it's intentional, that God created them to be unique. No one else will be exactly the same as they are, and that makes them special. The third thing we want to think about is that not only are we created in God's image, not only were we designed unique, but we are unconditionally loved. So our kids' self-esteem comes from God himself. And so this is really important. And so if you've got teens and tweens in your home right now, imagine this is happening all the time, right? They are disapproved when they look in the mirror. That's just them judging themselves. They're rejected by their peers. They're judged on social media. And so parents, we've got to help them overcome these insecurities by pointing them to the Maker, whose opinion is so far superior to the haters in their circle, in their schools, the people that they're circulating with. There's a YouTube video of a girl being airbrushed by artists around the world. I didn't load the video up for you. It's worth looking at. I thought it was fascinating because there's a particular girl who sent her picture out to artists online around the world, lots of different countries, and said, "Make me beautiful." And so these artists got online, took her image, and they crafted her image and turned her into what they perceived was beautiful. And so can you imagine? I mean, even if it were 20 different artists from 20 different countries, like none of them looked the same. All of the images of her were different. Why? Because they all perceived beauty in a different way. And we can kind of get that when we think about different cultures, but even within America, even within our own culture, in our own community, don't we see beauty and think about beauty differently? And so how important is it then for us to make sure that our kids recognize their value and that they are loved unconditionally because of who they are, because of who God made them, and not of what other people would perceive an improvement for them to make them more beautiful than they already are. Teens will accurately see themselves when they see themselves through God's eyes. So this love started before our kids were even born and took their first breath. So let's look at a few scriptures here in this particular topic. So Psalm 139, great place to go to for this particular topic. Psalm 139, verse 16 says, "Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there were none of them." God's love began before their existence even started. And even when our kids do fall into sin, Romans 5, 6 through 8, "For while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." And God's love, of course, shown through sacrifice. We're familiar with John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." And then think about true love, as talked about so much in Scripture, but 1 John 4, 11 and 12, and then in verse 19, good place to reference if you're taking notes. It says, "Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. We love because he first loved us." And so how important then, if we're going to be able to love other people, we've got to be able to perceive and understand and know firsthand God's love for us. Otherwise, we have no hope. But we love because God first loved us. And so just important to, I think, for us to enforce and tell our kids, God is not a cosmic cop who's looking for them to slip up and make a mistake. God is our Father who cares greatly for them, and when they're not who they should be in some of the actions that they take, God is that Father who is watching and waiting, going out to them, anticipating their return. That's the language, of course, of Luke 15. But tell your tweens and teens that their sin is not their identity. That's not what's going to define them. And I may have missed catching up on my verses. It's hard for me to see the screen in the back. But what I want to look at is from this passage in Proverbs 24:16. There we go. Proverbs 24:16 says, "For the righteous falls 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumble in times of calamity." So teach them not to give up. Their failures do not have to be the end of their story. Their failure is not their identity. Help them to see God's love is so great that it certainly can overcome the mistakes that they make. So I think it's so important for us, as parents to really model God's unconditional love for our family. And so I just sort of pose this, question for you to consider is how are you doing, at that? Unconditional love in your household. How many of you are familiar with the book, You're All My Favorites? Anybody ever have that as a children's book? Yeah, really great book when your kids are little. They're kind of wondering, like, who's mom and dad's favorite, right? Or grandpa, grandma. And the book just kind of takes through this really simple, nice story to help them to see that you're all my favorites. And that's our responsibility, is to ensure that our kids don't know the difference. Acts 10 teaches that there's no partiality with God. Is there partiality with you? I asked my mom once, I don't know why it's hard for me to talk about my mom without getting a little bit emotional, but I asked my mom once, I said, hey, what was like the one secret as to what made you a good parent? And she just gave me a one-word response. And her response was consistency. Now, I think my mom was really consistent in a couple of ways. She was consistent in terms of what she did day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. We need that consistency in our homes. But I think the other consistency was that she was consistent in how she treated each one of the children in her household. I never knew if my mom had a favorite, I wouldn't be able to tell you who it was. And I think even now when I see my mom, I see her delighting in getting a chance to visit with me one-on-one. But then I could look across the room and I'm like, she's really taking a lot of joy in visiting with my brother. Like, my mom really enjoys getting to be in the kitchen, cooking with my sister. Like, she's really consistent. She loves us unconditionally. And so we've got to mirror and model what God shows for us in how we treat our children. Even when they make mistakes, even when they're not like us and they're different, and we don't connect with them as easily as perhaps another one of our kids do, we need to make sure that we're consistent and showing that unconditional love. Another thing I think is really important, I'm going to show you, this could be a little bit of a troubling picture, but I want to show you something I ran across this week on a LinkedIn, just a promotional, professional website. And I thought it was really interesting. It's two contrasting pictures. And this is a picture of a gentleman named Corey Stevens. On the side to the left, you can see that he's accepting an award. He was awarded as Entrepreneur of the Year by Forbes magazine. He also had enjoyed the fact that he was on this list of the greatest 30 under 30, if you've ever heard of professional lists like that, right? So like this guy is in his 20s, like who are the best of the best in their 20s in their field, like this guy was. And so really successful person. But the picture beside it is the one that struck me when I saw this comparison. And he posted this. This wasn't posted by anyone else, but it's the same guy. And the first picture separated from the second picture only by a span of 9 days. And so the second picture is Corey before he checked himself into a mental health hospital because he was concerned he was going to take his own life. And so I wonder how much emphasis you and I put on our kids with respect to their report card, with respect to how they perform in a certain event or competition. And so we have to be really thoughtful about how much emphasis we put on things where they're showing their performance, because that's not what all life is. And there are going to be times when our kids come in second place or last place or struggle to make the team and win no awards. And we've got to be willing to show them unconditional love even when they're not at their best. And I think the other thing this picture contrast will teach us is the importance of making sure, because our kids are online so much, that not everything you see online is like the whole story. Because most of the time what we see is the first picture on the left. I mean, this dude's handsome. He's wearing a tuxedo. He's got this amazing award. But that's not all that was going on in his life. And so our kids are comparing themselves to a standard that they perceive in their own mind by what they see and they hear. And it is not full reality. And we've got to help them understand that. Otherwise, they're comparing themselves with something that is just not attainable and it isn't realistic and will cause them tremendous trouble as they're developing self-esteem and trying to better appreciate and understand their own identity. There's a great passage of Scripture, of course, that you're very familiar with that helps us to think about the importance of the heart. And so how superior it is to the intellect, to athleticism, to beauty. And so the passage is in 1 Samuel 16:7. So when God sent the prophet Samuel to go appoint the next king after Saul, Samuel, of course, thought it was going to be one of David's brothers that he had seen. Like, there's some impressive group here. I think I know who this is going to be. And yet God told him, and the scripture reads, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." The fourth thing we want to consider before we wrap up here in this particular section, made in the image of God, designed uniquely, and loved unconditionally, is that our kids, like us, are made with a purpose. It's said that if you want to really kind of define the word responsibility, you just break it in half. You can say responsibility. Responsibility is responding to our ability. And so once your kids understand that they are unique, they have these God-given abilities and talents, then they have a responsibility to live with the purpose that was defined by the Creator. The inventor determines the use for the invention. God determined the use for us as his creation. There are God-given expectations. So our kids were made to shine and to glorify God. Matthew 5:16. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Our kids, like us, were made to serve. Acts 13:36. For David, after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep and was laid with his fathers and saw corruption. Our kids, if they're to the point where they have obeyed the Lord and are Christians, there's a couple of passages that can be really helpful and effective for us to point them to as well. 1 Thessalonians 4:3-7. And this is a really good one in terms of like some of the things that our kids struggle with, right? The temptations that they face in particular in the teen years. It says, "For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God, that no one transgress and wrong his brother in this matter, because the Lord is an avenger in all these things, as we told you beforehand and solemnly warned you. For God has not called us to impurity, but in holiness." Set that bar for them that God has set for all of us as to what we should be striving to achieve based on the purpose that God has given us as his creation. And so also think about, as you know, the pinnacle of God's creation, mankind, God's creative masterpiece was also made for good works. Ephesians 2:10 says, For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." And we've had this conversation already this morning with Martin, thinking about how we need to do that alongside them. We need to model it for them. We teach it to them, but we participate in it with them. and give them opportunities to help support the abilities that God has given them, the responsibilities that they have while they're young, so they can continue to practice the right things, living out their purpose when they're no longer under our roof. And so again, if your child is a Christian, a really good verse is 1 Peter 2, verse 9. This is tremendous language, isn't it? To help us understand our value that we have with God and the purpose that he's given us. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. We're not left to try to figure out what is the meaning of life, right? That's something that our kids kind of search for, and a lot of times happens after they leave our home, even more than when they're under our roof. But God has already spelled it out. He's already revealed it. And we need to make sure that they understand that there's so much else in life that they can do as long as it helps support their need and God's desire for them to glorify him in their life. Lots of options. Where can I go to school? What kind of job can I have? Who can I marry? A lot of right options as long as they fit in the construct and the boundary of what God has approved and what the will of God is in doing the things that he has said are our purpose. All right, so a little bit of a call to action here. We got about 7 minutes just for all of us, and we're thinking about how we were created, and our kids were created in the image of God. They were created by his design as very unique and special. They are loved unconditionally by God, no matter what they look like and how they act sometimes, and their varied personalities. And yet with all of this becomes this responsibility to fulfill your purpose, to live like God created us to live. Ran across a story on Monday. It's pretty short. I'll just read this to you. I think there's an interesting parallel to you and me. And so the story is, it took less than a minute, and it just may have saved a life. At a celebratory dinner not long ago, someone at our table started to choke. Before anyone else realized what was happening, the wife of our guest of honor jumped out of her chair and rushed over. With what seemed like superhuman strength, she performed the Heimlich maneuver. After we had all gathered ourselves, she explained the story behind the story. So as a kid, she'd almost choked to death. And having endured this harrowing experience, she instinctively knew what to do, even when no one else around knew what to do. And she vowed to use her personal experience for the direct benefit of another. Simple story, beautiful act of heroism, and trying to do for someone else what they had hoped and wished and would be done for them in their moment of intensity and a scary moment, no doubt. And so all of you, every parent, every grandparent, every aunt and uncle, every friend, every young person of influence in the lives of our kids, we have all survived a near-death experience spiritually. It should motivate us that we've been saved, that we've got to apply what we knew. We've got to look for the opportunities to help save the other people, our kids, your kids, these kids in this church, everybody that God loves, who excludes no one. We have opportunity and responsibility to make sure that we leverage what's been done for us, for them. So as parents, here's the deal. Don't rely on your ISD. Don't rely on ChatGPT, mainstream media, social platforms, or the pimple-pinching peers of your kids to educate them. Ephesians 5, there's a verse there that I really like. I didn't put it up on the screen here, but there's an alternative translation that's really stayed with me that I like a lot. And I think it's a good verse for us, it's a good verse for our kids. And it says, live life with a due sense of responsibility, not as those who don't know the meaning of life, but as those who do. And I'm going to read that just one more time. Live life with a due sense of responsibility, not as those who don't know the meaning of life, but as those who do. And you do. You know the meaning of life. We need our kids to know the meaning of life. And once we do, then we have a responsibility to live it out. And so let's teach them about their purpose and the ability to do that. Now, there's no better resource, of course, than the scriptures. And so that's why we put a lot of verses together to help support the things that we're doing. And so truly by God's grace, we can have good, healthy, vibrant young people in our families, in our churches that will not depart from the faith, as Martin shared a list of some of those things that we can use to help assure ourselves that that's a greater possibility. But it's important for us to give them confidence in God's design, to give them confidence in God's wisdom about how life should be lived. That's what they're learning in the back, and that's what we're learning, and that's what we all together need to reinforce for our kids, in our churches, and in our homes in every possible way. And so leave them, of course, with this kind of verse as we give them this confidence, is this verse, Ecclesiastes 12:1. Teach them to remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, which you say, I have no pleasure in them. And one last sort of admonition is, we've got a couple of minutes here. I want to just sort of share something that strikes me a lot in terms of where I'm at, in my parenting. I have 4 teenagers, and sometimes it feels like time is running out. And so I would say to you, if you have younger kids and you think about, some of the evidences that we're sort of considering here together in this second session, it just isn't too early to start talking to them at an age-appropriate level about these sorts of things. It just isn't. And we need to make sure that we're taking advantage of every opportunity with them. And I will tell you, my experience is that as they get older, and you see this and you hear this, our kids are created and designed, and it's intentional for them to separate from us, right? That's our goal. We want them to live independently, and that's God's intention. But as they go through these teenage years, they're pulling away from us. And that can be tricky and it can be hard. And one of the things that I've learned is that they don't listen as well as I thought they would through the finish line, right? I kind of thought maybe I had access to them to say and teach anything I wanted to till they were 18. And that just isn't true. And so I say that to you with all love and respect, that you need to start sooner than you think you need to start. And you need to repeat more than you think you need to repeat. And you need to get an audience and a community of godly people to engage and support your children, to help reinforce the things that they need to know. It's going to take all of us working together by the grace of God to help our kids to love Him the way that we love Him, to serve Him faithfully, and to go be with Him one day, forever. May God bless you in your walk to do that. We have 1 minute. Let's spend it in prayer.